Awesome. Well, to kick it off, Manuel, can you just share a little bit about who you are, your background, and what your current role is?
Yeah, well, hey everybody, first of all, Manuel Harnisch, currently VP of Customer Success here at FOSSA, and we're an open source compliance and vulnerability DevOps solution, if you will. Been here about 6 months, came in to kind of take over the CS function that was pretty nascent at the time and really up-level it for the team. We're a Series B company, we're trying to get to cash flow break even by the end of this year, and we're just trying to be around for our customers in the future. And I've been in the CS space for, gosh, since before it was called CS. I was post sales support, all the things, and I've worn multiple hats throughout my career: pre-sales, post sales, free professional services, you name it. I've done a good bit of that. So that's a little bit about myself.
I love it. And so how did you kind of get into this type of work to begin with? Did you set out to be customer facing? Did you kind of fall into it?
Yeah, great question. And I always think back, like, how did this happen, right? So way back in the day, I was always kind of like on the consulting side of things. Actually, during college, I worked for a small IT consulting company. Literally, it was like 5 people, and we would do, wireless rollouts, and we would do like office migrations, server deployments, stuff like that. And I liked that action. It was deep, it was technical enough, but it was also like being in front of people and like getting to do a lot of different things on a day-to-day basis. And so I did that for a while, and then had to do some co-ops for the college program. Ended up working at Comcast for about 5 months, and absolutely hated that. Not because Comcast is a bad company, it's just because it's a huge huge organization. You're just kind of one of very many, and so I decided like that wasn't what I wanted to do long term, and be better off in smaller companies. And so I actually was found by a recruiter for this like tiny no-name startup, and I'd never done a startup up until that point. And it was sort of serendipitous. They're like, "Yeah, we need somebody that knows this particular flavor of Linux, and you would be doing all the things, including support and building boxes and so forth." And I was like, "Okay, that sounds great." It's pretty unattached at the time, and so I took a leap, and that's really what started my formal journey in the startup space. Grew up through support, did a bunch of post sales, back in the day when you actually had to rack and stack and deploy servers in customers' data centers. I did a good bit of that. Had an opportunity to go into pre-sales and pre-sales engineering, and kind of like was able to dovetail the technical capabilities that I built up with sort of like learning how to actually be presentable and talk, and not give away all of the secrets of the company right away in the pre-sales motion. And so I did that for a number of years, and then eventually had the opportunity to lead my first team in a formal way, and that was called Platform Services. Our charter really there was to take the fear away from customers that were trying to upgrade, and that was really painful for customers and the company at the time. And slowly but surely, we're trying to pivot towards SaaS as part of that effort as well. And while that company I was with at the time never really quite caught the curve to get into SaaS, I saw the writing on the wall, and actually a mutual customer of ours at the time that really liked me, but was kind of like on its way out from that company and into the next one, said you should go to talk to Kentic, which is what my first launch into SaaS on a full-time basis and building the CS team kind of was. And so been in SaaS ever since, and been enjoying it, and specifically on the customer success side, which kind of marries a lot of the skill sets that I've been able to build up over the years.
I love that. I'm curious to hear your opinion about what some of the differences are when you were doing a lot of pre-sales, sales engineering work, and now post-sale, technical customer success.
Yeah, well, I was doing sales engineering back in the era where it really didn't matter whether your customer got any value from what you sold them, because all they would care about post sales was the maintenance lines. That's what finance would look at from the CFO perspective. And so it was a little different then than I guess it is now, because now like pre-sales is post sales in a lot of situations. If you sold something pre-sales that you can't deliver post-sales either technically or from an account expectations perspective, you're kind of setting yourself up for a lot of pain, right? Because at most you'll have a multi-year agreement. Usually you have at least a year agreement, but then after that, it's up for renewal, and you could lose that whole amount of revenue. And so I think it's shifted a little bit from like, oh, let's just sell anything that we can and let CS or support figure it out after the fact, to this more like, hey, whatever we pitch pre-sales actually has to work post-sales. And so we have to work a little bit extra hard to make sure that it's actually supportable and sustainable, and the customer can get value from that. That's certainly been the direction that I've seen.
That's awesome. And because you've had a lot of exposure to the entire sales, the customer life cycle, I'm curious to hear how you've seen the post-sale side change. You mentioned earlier that you've been involved with customer success before it was called customer success, and I think a lot of people forget it's a new name for work that I think people have been doing for a long time.
Yeah, I think historically it was more like break fix, being reactive, right? Like more typical support, right? I had this problem, help me fix it. I have this bug that I'm looking to report, and so you had to sort of work through that and ticket manage mostly. I think the shift in customer success and really like reframing it from purely support to being proactive has been the biggest change, right? And so now post-sales, what we end up doing a lot of times is we're trying to understand the business problems that the customers are looking to solve with whatever we positioned and sold them, and how we can best accomplish that with them. We're here to enable those customers. We're not necessarily here to solve all the problems for them, but show them how they can do that. And I kind of call this we're here to teach you how to fish, and not necessarily, we're not fish as a service. Some people think of it that way, but that's been the shift, and the way, sort of the mantra I apply to customer success as a whole is, selling won't help, but helping will sell. And ultimately, if we do that right, we get renewals, we get the value, and we also get to position upsells and cross sells and expansions if and where it makes sense, because we delivered value and because we helped the customer get success.
Do you feel that organizations understand the value that customer success provides more now than they did a few years ago?
It's definitely an ongoing effort. I think it's a lot better now than it was, say, even 10 years ago or 5 years ago. I think there's still a struggle when you have a company that legacy would sell perpetual licenses, right? Like, one big payment up front and then some maintenance. If that's the mindset and you're trying to shift away from that, it's still much harder. If you are purely a SaaS company from the start, and those are mostly startups, or some of the big ones that kind of like pioneered customer success like Salesforce, then it's a lot easier to justify, right? Because they understand that even though you have that revenue for 1 year, there's no guarantee that you're going to keep it unless you actually put in the work and you help enable your customers. There's this new notion of product-led growth, or product-led companies, and there's also CLG now, customer-led growth. Those are still the set, right? And I think there's still a fairly big gap that has to be overcome between customer expectations and what you can deliver, purely through the product, and that's where customer success helps bridge that gap.
I love the framing of bridging the gap. Something that I've heard a lot recently is this notion of customer success being a gap filling role. And I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts about, first of all, is it a good thing or a bad thing when that's the case, and just maybe some insights how you would view it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a realist. I would say I'm an optimistic realist in that sense. In an ideal scenario, customer success would be very, very focused on just facilitating the value delivery to customers, right? Teaching them how to do things with your product, helping them connect the bits and pieces, and then talking about like best practices, right? Like, other customers like you do it this way, therefore this is the recommendation we would have for you, right? And that fills a certain kind of gap. That sort of fills the self-value discovery gap. And some products can do that on their own, but most of them can't, especially not for startups, because you don't have unlimited resources. You're not you're not Google, you're not Salesforce, where value is just so apparent because everybody knows about you and everybody knows what you're looking to solve. And so that is one type of gap. The other type of gap is like everything else, right? And there's this term like CS is the department of everything. I don't like to think of it that way, but inevitably it certainly becomes true in some scenarios because you are so close to the customer. So in a perfect world, you are like a CSM and the CSE, if you have engineers, they're the face of the company post sales, right? And so of course, customer would be like, hey, I have this challenge with pay my bill, right? And you could talk to the CSM. So that's not necessarily a job, but they're still involved in that. Or they may be like, hey, I'm speaking at this conference. Can you help me generate these reports, right? Even though that's technically my job, as the customer, like I'm still going to lean on you to help me with that. And so CS will try and say yes to that as much as it can, provided it feels like it's delivering value to the customer. It's not just busy work. But yeah, it is a bit of a department of everything, but with the end goal of really driving additional value and driving that partnership and that relationship with the customers.
You mentioned CSE, and I assume you mean customer success engineering.
Yes.
It's an even newer role than customer success, and certainly something that's gotten very popular in the last few years. For people who who would you describe as really great at a CSE type role? Because I think that takes a special type of person to actually do that well.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say there's a couple different ways you can get into that role. I've had success, and I've seen people make the transition from pre-sales engineer to that CSE post-sales engineer type of role. It's usually the SEs that ultimately care more about the relationship and want to go a couple levels deeper versus just getting the wins and moving on to the next thing. So that is certainly one path. Another path is from a tech support type of role. Somebody that's really good technically and kind of grows up through that structure, but then wants to take it to the next level and really up level their sort of like presentation skills, their people interaction skills, and marry that together with the deep technical skills. And so, yes, it is a newer type of role. I think a lot of companies don't have it. In fact, sometimes I'm shocked, even though you have a fairly technical product, there's no engineers, and something that would take maybe an hour or two to figure out with an engineer on the line usually takes 4 weeks for a CSM to go back and forth between their technical people and what I'm trying to solve. And so it's really a way to accelerate value, and it also builds a lot of trust with your customers. If you have somebody that can speak at the same level as the customer, and this was super apparent when I was at Kentic, we were selling and monitoring the networks of some of the largest ISPs in the world, right? They were grateful when they could talk to somebody that understood the language, right? Like, what does BGP peering mean, right? What do you mean the route went down? If you can communicate at the same level with them, they'll trust you much more quickly, and they'll work with you on the issues much more quickly than if you had that sort of in between and go between that really didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, first of all, this resonates with what I've seen as well. The other place where I guess I've seen this happen, and I sense you've probably seen something similar, is with implementation teams, where they're maybe on the pre-sale side doing implementation work, and then also post-sale. I'm curious to hear if you have seen that as well, or if that's been pretty separated in your experience.
Yeah, that's it's an interesting point. I've spent most of my career in like Series A through C companies. And that's usually, and it's not always the case, but it's usually too early to have a dedicated implementation team. At least that's been my experience. And so in all the companies I've been at, the CSM and the CSE would kind of do everything post-sales, from initial implementation, onboarding, this, that, and the other, to the ongoing account relationship, continuous value delivery, tech check-ins, and then ultimately renewal and upsells. There's an argument to be made for doing separate implementation teams earlier, because it is somewhat of a unique or specialized skill set. However, in a contracting economy, it's kind of hard to justify that as a separate set of resources. And so I think some companies built that over the last 2 or 3 years, and I think more and more now it's collapsing back into just being pure CS, until you get to several hundred employees as a whole, right? The companies I usually join started like 25, 30 people and go all the way up to about 200, and that's really when you start to be able to specialize.
I love that. Yeah, that definitely lines up with what I've seen as well. So for my sense is you've gotten to work with a lot of different people in these post-sale teams. I know you are you've built teams out before in the past. I'm curious to hear how you separate or how you would identify some things that the really great people at customer success, like what do they do differently than the people who are just good at it? I think there's the A+ people out there who are extraordinary at it. Like, do they do something different?
Research, 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 and going above and beyond. So I will, I'll sort of share from my experience. Anytime that I've hired somebody or that I ran a job search, it was the people that found me on LinkedIn that realized like I'm the hiring manager. I need to go ahead and introduce myself there and sort of like explain my value proactively. Or say we're in the same Slack community. I'm a part of many different CS communities. They would find me there and they would introduce themselves and they would sort of ask some clarifying questions and things like that. That is a phenomenal way to stand out as part of the interview process, but it also tells me you'll go above and beyond for your customers post sales. Post coming onto the team, right? For instance, a lot of times we have to chase individuals either for contracts or for certain meetings and so forth. And sometimes people will just blow you off. The customer success managers that can sort of overcome that and get creative and figure out paths around that sort of scenario tend to be the same that do the research pre-interview and really find you as a hiring manager. So those have been some of the best hires that I've had that really make themselves stand out as part of the process, and then they deliver the same thing post sales.
I love that because it's something that you can filter for before somebody's in your organization, which I think sometimes it's really tough to do that. So I think that's a great, very insightful, which I appreciate. So imagine you're somebody who's technical, you want to be customer facing, you're trying to decide sales engineering, customer success engineering, customer success management, et cetera. Like any tips for people who are kind of thinking about maybe, getting out of the back office and moving to the front office, wanting to work with customers?
Yeah, try it out, right? Try and find opportunities within your company to do those things. I personally was very fortunate, in the opportunities that were presented. When I became an SE, we had two of our SEs at the time. Those were the only two, other than the manager. They quit within 2 weeks of each other for totally different reasons, and so I was like, hey, who can help me? You look like somebody that could help, right? And so I was like, yes, I'll take that opportunity. But it doesn't always work that way, right? I was pretty fortunate in that. And so, but you can create your own luck. You can create your own opportunities where, if you're like, hey, we're doing this trade show, now the trade shows are a thing again, volunteer and be like, hey, I'm happy to go. I'm happy to set up. I'm happy to do whatever, but I also want to be on the floor and help talk to customers and position value, right? That's one way to kind of get into things. Volunteer to work in support for a while. Little secret: no support organization ever will, reject free help, especially if it's above and beyond, your regular duties. Yes, that will require you to work a little bit more, but it's a great way to learn about the challenges that your customers are having. It's a great way to get to talk to customers, whether it's via email or in real time via Zoom and other ways, depending on your model, and to learn about the challenges, and then take that learning and parlay it into something that's more proactive, right? If you can solve 1 or 2 problems for a support organization by aggregating a bunch of feedback and saying like, hey, we're getting the same question like 20 times over here, let's go ahead and make something proactive for that. You're adding immediate value, you're gaining valuable skills, and you're helping yourself stand out from everybody else.
I love that. I think support rotations extremely powerful. Just a little anecdote for you. Early GitHub used to have a role called King of Support or Queen of Support, depending on who was doing it. And every engineer had to do a rotation in support, and they had a big fake throne and a bunch of monitors on it, like huge number of monitors. And the idea was you would spend a week joining the support team and doing support. I think it's one of the most powerful tools for building customer empathy
Yes.
they ever did.
Yeah, it's funny. Back at Sev1, we did this in the early days. We didn't do it so much when we got big, and I wish there was more drive to kind of do it on an ongoing basis. But I always said, like, pretty much everybody that's going to be customer facing or technical, whether it's product, SEs, even some sales reps. So it's a little bit of a difference because everybody should spend their first 3 months at the company in support, right? And I'm not even kidding about the amount of time, because there's a great way to learn about the product, learn about the challenges, interact with customers, and really kind of see it from the ground up. And by the way, in that process, you're also helping out the support team tremendously, because again, you're never going to get rejected for additional help there. And I think it's a great way to learn about the company. Unfortunately, most companies don't end up doing that for various reasons, and I understand sometimes it's just not possible resource-wise. But what a great way to learn!
Absolutely, and I think you get a lot of empathy for the support team too. I know at GitHub, people didn't realize how hard that job was.
Yeah.
I love it. So in the past few years, let's say three or 4 years, have you noticed the way the job works has changed? Do you do different things as a customer success leader now than you did, 5-10 years ago?
Yeah, I think the biggest shift has probably been more towards like revenue metrics, right? Like revenue matters a lot more. I think historically it was like, hey, do the right things for your customers, and the rest will sort of sort itself out. But the organizations that keep a close eye on their DR and NR, and really like not necessarily manage to do that, but understand how their actions impact those numbers and how they can help the company as a whole, not just their little departments, I think is sort of critical. You probably hear this, and others have talked about this, is like, well, customer success is a department, it's a job function, but it's really the whole company's job, right? If your customers aren't getting value and success from your products, and you have a high churn rate, then your business is eventually going to fail. And so customer success as a department can be that unique advocate, because they do it every single day, but ultimately really their job is to facilitate what we're hearing from customers back to the rest of the business, and to create that bi-directional empathy, right? And then to influence where the company goes as a whole. And I think the shift has been like, hey, it's not just our little thing here, and it's one part of the company, it's really the whole company, and we're here to facilitate that for everybody.
You mentioned being aligned with the other parts of, especially the revenue chain. What ways do you think that you can do that, or companies can do that in a healthy way? Like what have you seen that works really well to get those people aligned?
Well, I think, working very closely together and being in pretty much in lockstep, this idea, the idea of a customer team, right? I think is really critical. Some companies will have like a very specific like SDR function. All they do is get meetings, and then sales will take over and they sell the deal, and then they hand it over, and then CS does their thing, and then you'll never talk to sales again. That's sort of like the old way of thinking about it. At the end of the day, yes, people may change, right? Territories change and so forth, but really I think you have to have that symbiosis between an account executive, a pre-sales engineer, if it's sort of a new expansionary conversation, your CSM, which is really like the overall quarterback, the coach of that customer team, if you will, on a customer by customer basis, and then your customer success engineer that helps deliver the technical value. Now, I'm specifically talking about enterprise, like high touch, large types of clients, right? If you are in a digital CS motion, you're doing things kind of like in an automated fashion, it's a little bit different. I mean, there's still some overlap that you can apply there, but for your largest customers and for your highest value customers, that's really the motion that is a winning combination from what I've seen.
Kind of changing gears a little bit. How do you do you have some sense of how things may change in the next few years, like how customer success might evolve?
Well, let's see. Let me get my crystal ball out. Well, there's this new thing. You may have heard of it, AI. Everybody's talking about like how AI will change everything. I do think that there will be a big wave of sort of augmentation, like AI augmentation of interactions that we have. I'm already seeing this now with, say, you have a gong recording and it produces a transcript, and you can ask an AI like, hey, this 45-minute call, like summarize the main points, give me action items out of that. out of that transcript, and then write the email back to the customer for that. That still takes a couple steps right now, but I imagine that becomes part of your CSP, whatever system you have, and you just click one button and it does it, or maybe no button and it just does it automatically, right? So I think that's one of the areas that I absolutely think there's going to be change. That will drive a lot more efficiencies, but I also think it will create a lot of new opportunities and new roles that will then help optimize that further. Because that human touch, that's not, I don't see that going away. Yes, AI can do a lot of things and can optimize a lot of things, but it's not going to completely replace the relationship building and having conversations. The other thing, and this may actually in some ways be a harder problem to solve, but I'd actually love for AI to start thinking about that, or companies that are going down that route, which is around like actually figuring out patterns in your data, right? Every startup that I've been at has a set of data about their customers, whether it's like certain features and functionalities that are being turned on, right? Obviously, Salesforce data, there might be call recordings. Like there's all these different places where customer interactions happen, whether they're programmatic or they're human interactions. But there's very little today that's not a rules-based engine to actually score a customer relationship, right? So yes, you can have you can have a weighted average score of your customer, but then how do you really know that that's right? Whereas if you can actually connect all of these systems to something that will then learn patterns on its own without any like human interaction, and you can ask questions and be like, hey, which ones of my customers are doing the best and why, right? Where should I focus most of my time? Which customers are definitely going to churn, and no matter what I do, it's not going to help, right? Like if I can ask those questions and I can get real answers to that, then that will be a game changer. And I do think that that's going to take a little bit more time, but that's going to be a major shift in customer success, being augmented by AI in the next couple of years.
That's very interesting. A term I hear a lot is single pane of glass. People want that one place they can go and understand what's going on with their customer. And maybe this is kind of the chipping away to get to that point of, hey, just tell me. So we're an automation platform. We do the co-pilot model like you suggest. We're in Slack, so if your conversations happen there, we do the summarization and extract tasks and all that stuff. But you're right, like we don't know what's happening in Salesforce. We don't know what's happening in the Zoom call with the customer. So I think it is a fascinating idea about where things may go, in the near future.
Yeah. And I mean, even to that point, like even just simple things like utilization metrics, right? Like you could have a situation where customers like using all the features in your product and they're still not doing well, right? And vice versa, you can have somebody that's only using one or two things and they're super happy, right? And so like figuring that out at scale in a programmatic fashion, right? Without necessarily a human having to write a rule set for it, because like all the rule sets, I've not seen a single one that works super well at scale for all your customers. I think that's really where the differentiation will come.
I totally agree. I think there's a lot of very interesting things happening in this space. I would absolutely agree with that. Is there something that you're feeling really excited about, like kind of in this vein, something you saw a glimpse of, or something where you're like, wow, when this happens, and maybe that's what you just said, like this notion of proactive awareness. I'm curious though if there's something that's just fills you with excitement when you think about the idea that it may happen soon.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I'll go back to some of these AI automations. I mean, if you think about it, ChatGPT was released in late November of last year, and here we are in late March of 2023, 4 months later, and the just like the Cambrian explosion of new capabilities and plugins that have been developed in just the last 4 months is pretty phenomenal. I do think that that's going to continue. I will say that we do have to be somewhat cautious. There's a real argument to be made for this technology also being somewhat dangerous if we're not careful. So I'm not a complete optimist with it. But that being said, I think any technology will always carry some sort of downside and some risk to it. And I think we'll get it figured out. I am pretty bullish on that whole thing though, and I think there's a lot of opportunity for just really driving efficiencies, and in this economy, being able to do more with the same amount of resources than adding more people.
Yeah, that's awesome. I was talking with a friend of mine who thinks a lot about AI safety, and in the conversation, what came up was the nuclear bomb in the Manhattan Project. When they were trying to figure this out, they weren't sure if the nuclear test was going to ignite the atmosphere. Like they thought it could completely alight all of the oxygen in there, and of course that didn't happen. But think about all of let's exclude the bomb itself. Think about all the great things that came out of that: MRIs, X-rays, GPS. Like all of those incredible things from something that was potentially very scary. So I think it's very fascinating, and I'm with you. I think very optimistic about where this could possibly go. I'm curious. This is my last question. I know we've run a little longer than expected. I appreciate you taking the time. But where do you see like the role of automation in terms of doing good customer success? I think people generally want to talk to people, but that leaves a whole lot of opportunity for just pure automation. I'm curious to know if you think that there's things that you're surprised aren't already automated, or you think will be imminently automated.
Well, I think there were maybe two questions, but I think like where I think things are going is sort of augmentation, right? Human augmentation. I think humans are still going to do a lot of the interaction, that they're going to coordinate them, right? And they may intervene and sort of jump in when things aren't put together right and whatnot. Where I do think that automation will be key, though, is like I shouldn't have to go look up certain stats about my customers, right? I shouldn't have to go look up in, say, the accounting system whether they paid or not. Like that should just be information that's presented to me as part of whatever HUD, heads up display I have for a given conversation, so I can then react and have the right response if it comes up reactively or I want to mention it proactively. And so I think that's where the biggest efficiency gains can be had, and avoiding a lot of busy work and really focusing on what's most impactful, which is having good conversations and delivering value, and also capturing new ideas from your customer base. I think that's probably the biggest change.
That's awesome, Manuel. This has been really informative. I genuinely appreciate you taking the time to chat today.
Yeah, thank you. This was great. Thanks, Paul. Have a good one.
Take care. Have a good one.